Today, you are going to see works where every damn frame could hang in a museum. The absolute peak of cinema, where the pathological perfectionism of directors led them to achieve visual mastery. And I am not talking about mere aestheticism. Here, every shot hides symbolism, soul, and a narrative that conveys more than 1,000 words. Get ready, because you are about to witness films with a beauty so incredible that in over 50 years, no one has been able to surpass them. In the Red Desert, we see Juliana, a woman trapped in a profound psychological crisis and existential disconnection after suffering a brutal traffic accident. To capture her mental alienation and her panic at the cold, dehumanized industrial world surrounding her, Michelangelo Antonioni did not settle for filming reality. He literally painted it. He altered the landscape at will, painting trees, grass, and factories in shades of grey and reddish tones to reflect her protagonist's anxiety and alienation. He managed to transform a toxic industrial environment into a sickly, melancholic, and hypnotic beauty. It is the most brutal expressionist use of color in cinema. Here, the landscape is a fractured state of mind. In Hero, we immerse ourselves in ancient China to witness the encounter between a nameless warrior and the king of Qin, whom he intends to assassinate by recounting how he defeated his most dangerous enemies. But in this martial arts masterpiece, the truth is not told with words. It is told through color. Zhang Yimou and cinematographer Christopher Doyle divide the narrative into brutal chromatic blocks. The red of passion, the blue of reason, the white of truth, and the green of memory. Every duel is a hypnotic visual ballet where floating garments, falling leaves, and water defy gravity. It is the ultimate proof that action cinema, when filmed with artistry, can rival the finest paintings in the Louvre. Black Narcissus by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger, with cinematography by the legendary Jack Cardiff, is the holy grail of Technicolor. A group of Anglican nuns travels to a remote and exotic Himalayan cliff to found a convent, but the altitude, the untamable wind, and the ghosts of the past unleash a dangerous erotic and psychological tension within them. To film this descent into madness, the cinematographer worked an unrepeatable miracle in 3-strip Technicolor. The film was not shot in India, but in the cold Pinewood Studios in England. Every towering mountain is, literally, a matte painting on glass. He ensured that the sweaty faces and gazes of desire pierced the viewer as if we were standing before a living Baroque canvas. Krzysztof Kieślowski bid farewell to cinema by giving us an obsession. Here, the color red does not decorate the scenes. It haunts you. It is on a giant billboard, on a car, on a mug, in the camera filters. It is a living presence. The story begins with a model who runs over the dog of a retired judge, a sullen man who spends his time spying on his neighbors. But the plot is almost an excuse. What is truly hypnotic is how cinematographer Piotr Sobocinski moves the camera. It floats elegantly and melancholically, linking the lives of these two strangers through reflections and warm lights. You do not watch a movie. You feel trapped inside an invisible destiny that connects broken souls through color. Can the most heart-wrenching passion be filmed while entirely forsaking color? Paweł Pawlikowski proves that it can. In Cold War, we witnessed the purest, most toxic, magnetic, and impossible love between a music director and a young singer crossing borders in post-war Europe. To portray this doomed romance, cinematographer Łukasz Żal trapped the lovers in a 4x3 format that feels suffocating. But the real miracle is its black and white. With a violent contrast of blinding lights and deep shadows where bodies seem sculpted in marble, it absorbs both the decadence of Parisian jazz clubs and the cold of communist Poland. The absence of color has never had so much soul. In The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, Roger Deakins redefined the modern Western, turning betrayal into a twilight elegy. Here we follow the final months of the legendary outlaw Jesse James's life and his sickly relationship of admiration and jealousy with his future killer, Robert Ford. But what truly grips you is its melancholic, dreamlike atmosphere. To achieve this, Deakins altered vintage lenses, creating blurred edges that make every shot look like a 19th century photograph coming to life. The absolute zenith is the mythical nighttime train robbery scene. Total darkness, broken only by the locomotive's headlights filtering through the smoke and trees. It makes the violence of the wasteland feel like a funeral dirge. The double life of Veronique poses an unsettling premise. What if you had your soulmate living on the other side of the continent? Kieślowski follows two identical women, one Polish and one French, who share a mystical bond. To envelop us in this spiritual atmosphere, the crew abandoned realism, flooding the screen with intense yellow, amber, and green optical filters. Light constantly pierces through windows and glass marbles, transforming routine into a melancholic dream. The camera interprets the world through reflections and distortions, so that the screen resembles a broken mirror. It is spiritual cinema, where music and light manage to film the impossible, the human soul. Few filmmakers dared to compress the birth of the universe and an afternoon of play in Texas into a single breath. With The Tree of Life, Terrence Malick shattered all conventional narrative grammar to deliver an absolute sensory experience. On one hand, we see cosmic evolution. On the other, we experience the grief of an adult remembering his childhood, marked by the strictness of his father and the infinite tenderness of his mother. Emmanuel Lubezki's camera acts as an invisible presence that chases the actors with natural light, shunning any artificial lighting to capture every moment as if it were a sacred memory. This recklessly ambitious work turns cinema into a visual prayer, a reminder that between the immensity of the stars and the dust of the earth, every existence is a miracle. Ingmar Bergman claimed that the inside of the human soul is a vast red membrane. In Cries and Whispers, he pushed that disturbing intuition to its absolute limit. The story traps us in a stately manner to witness the agonizing pain of a woman dying of cancer, flanked by the coldness of her two sisters and the only genuine comfort provided by her maid. Sven Nykvist pulls off a feat of psychological lighting, making pale, hypnotic faces float against rooms upholstered in a violent and oppressive crimson. Here, the transitions do not fade to black. They fade to a pure red that suffocates the viewer. It is the ultimate portrait of isolation and the fear of death, where light exposes the miseries of the spirit with devastating beauty. During the filming of Ran, Akira Kurosawa was practically blind, relying entirely on his crew and meticulous canvases he painted by hand before his world went dark. This brutal adaptation of King Lear in feudal Japan depicts the tragic collapse of an aging warlord betrayed by the greed of his own sons. The visual display is sheer pictorial violence. Entire armies color-coded in yellows, blues, and reds clashing beneath storm clouds. The iconic burning of the castle in absolute silence is the climax of a genius that defied biology itself. The filmmaker did not need his eyes. The perfect composition already dwelt in his mind. Originally conceived as a communist propaganda pamphlet, I Am Cuba utterly failed as an ideological tool, only to end up revolutionizing the rules of cinema. Rejected in Moscow and Havana for its excess of poetry, this chronicle of the oppression of peasants and students before the revolution remained buried until Martin Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola resurrected it in the 90s. What they salvaged was an unprecedented visual miracle. Cinematographer Sergei Urusevsky used infrared film to tint the Caribbean landscape a ghostly, unreal white. The real technical madness lies in its impossible tracking shots. The camera floats above buildings, dives into pools, and weaves through crowds defying the laws of physics. Every single frame is a formal declaration of war against conventional cinema. Filmed 1 year before man set foot on the moon, 2001 captured infinity on celluloid. Stanley Kubrick expanded the tale from the dawn of our species to an expedition to the edges of Jupiter, threatened by the cold logic of an artificial intelligence. In pursuit of extreme realism, the crew shot inside a 30-ton centrifuge to simulate gravity and warped light using the slit scan technique, birthing the suffocating psychedelic journey of the climax. 0 pixels. Everything here is practical models, optical lenses, and pure mathematics. Its geometric perfection continues to humiliate modern science fiction, forcing us to stare into the cosmic void to confront our own origins. Making an entire movie by shooting only 20 minutes a day sounds like commercial suicide, but it gave rise to the most beautiful cinematic canvas ever filmed. Days of Heaven sets its rural tragedy in the early 20th century, following a trio of fugitives who pose as siblings while hiding on a vast, isolated wheat farm in Texas. Nestor Almendros defied Hollywood norms by turning off artificial lights and subjecting the production to the tyranny of the sun, filming almost entirely during the so-called magic hour. That brief, agonizing moment between dusk and nightfall bathes the fields in a golden melancholy that smells of fire, wheat, and nostalgia, birthing textures so pure that nature ceases to be a mere backdrop, instead silently judging the greed of men. Tess is the most unjustly underrated masterpiece in the entire history of cinema. During filming, cinematographer Jeffrey Unsworth, the very genius behind 2001, died of a heart attack, forcing Ghislaine Cloquet to take over to finish this crowning achievement by Roman Polanski. If the previous entry turned the magic hour into a legend, this one completely surpasses it by transforming it into a heart-wrenching dramatic weapon, demanding a titanic 9-month shoot where they rejected studio lights to chase the purest, most diffused natural light ever put to film. This Thomas Hardy adaptation portrays the fate of two fatally intertwined beings, born to love each other, but condemned to be crushed by Victorian moral rigidity. The diversity of its landscapes is colossal, and every outdoor setting functions as a mirror of the soul. The golden mists of spring innocence give way to grey mud and frozen winter horizons when the pain becomes irreversible. This pastoral canvas comes to life to prove that light and colour do not decorate the screen, but rather bleed the tragedy of its protagonist. Capturing the immensity of absolute nothingness to transform it into the most colossal spectacle in the history of cinema. That is Lawrence of Arabia, an optical and physical miracle where the desert is a relentless and mystical antagonist that devours men's sanity. For this epic, they had to drag incredibly heavy 70mm cameras through unexplored areas of Jordan, braving temperatures of 50 degrees that threatened to melt the very celluloid inside the magazines. The result is a superhuman scale. Every panoramic frame is a perfect pictorial composition, where the blistering sky and endless dunes crush the protagonist's ego, showing that true epicness is conquered by enduring thirst under the sun. If modern cinema knows how to light the darkness, it is thanks to the masterclass delivered by Vittorio Storaro in this beautiful nightmare. The conformist dissects a man terrified of his own identity, willing to commit any atrocity just to blend into Mussolini's Italy. Bernardo Bertolucci transforms that moral misery into an imposing cage of light and marble. The gigantic totalitarian buildings reduce the individual to an insignificant speck of dust, while sharp shadows slice across faces like the bars of a psychological prison. There are no melancholic landscapes or sunrises here. A palette of cold colors and chiaroscuro reigns with millimeter-perfect coldness. It is tyranny seducing the retina, an aesthetic display so extreme and avant-garde that Francis Ford Coppola adopted it as the absolute visual Bible for conceiving the shadows of The Godfather. No one has ever filmed love with the devastating beauty of Paris, Texas. It is my favorite film for an undeniable reason. It dissects that unique bond, those two halves destined to meet which, even if they cannot be together, can never manage to be whole without the other. Wim Wenders and Robbie Muller crafted a visual poem inspired by the melancholic realism of Edward Hopper. They transformed loneliness and love into a canvas where neon signs, bleeding sunsets, and industrial lights say what dialogue keeps quiet. The peep show scene is not filmed theatre. It is a communion of souls, where the camera shows us what does not exist in words. Through that play of reflections, both of their faces merge into a single identity, capturing the pain of those who recognize themselves as the same being split in two. It is, quite simply, the pinnacle of cinema. The Leopard documented the end of a world, with a level of demand so absurdly extreme that it would bankrupt any studio today. Luchino Visconti resurrected the 19th century in such an obsessive way that he forced the extras' underwear, invisible to the lens, to be washed using techniques of the era. To film this Sicilian agony, Giuseppe Rotunno mastered the massive Technirama format, lighting the palaces exclusively with thousands of real candles that melted in minutes, forcing the crew to race against the clock to replace them between takes. That suffocating heat drowning the screen is the wax consuming the oxygen on set. Such perfectionist madness explodes in the climax, an uninterrupted 45-minute ball. As the early morning progresses, the actor's physical exhaustion bleeds through the celluloid. Sweat cracks the makeup, postures collapse, and the opulent gold of the candelabras is finally annihilated by the merciless light of dawn. It is a slap of reality, where the camera simply observes how time buries an entire social class. Filming the inside of the human mind should be impossible. But in The Mirror, Andrei Tarkovsky filmed the most transcendental experience in the entire history of cinema. The obsession behind every frame borders on psychiatric. The director had the exact cabin from his childhood rebuilt based on old photographs and ordered an immense field of buckwheat to be planted 1 year in advance. All of this solely and exclusively to be able to capture that chilling moment when an invisible gust of wind flattens the crops. Rehberg's camera behaves like an altered state of consciousness, mutating unpredictably between a raw black and white, ghostly sepias and hypnotic colors. Natural elements take on a crushing physical weight. The roof leaks inside the houses, a barn burns under torrential rain, and spilled milk stains the rotting wood. It is an unfathomable ghostly visual transmission that hijacks your subconscious, forcing you to inherit a nostalgia and intimate memories that do not even belong to you, but that connect with those of your own soul. The history of cinema has a ceiling, and it is illuminated by candlelight. With Barry Lyndon, Stanley Kubrick did not settle for portraying the 18th century. He hacked the laws of optics to hijack it. He flat out refused to introduce a single artificial light source in the night sequences. To achieve the impossible, he acquired 3 50mm Carl Zeiss lenses, ultra-fast optics created by NASA exclusively to photograph the dark side of the moon. Adapting that aerospace technology to the cameras required destroying and redesigning them, all for a single insane purpose: to film the lavish aristocratic drawing rooms using as the only light source the flickering fire of the candelabras. Alongside cinematographer John Alcott, Kubrick transformed the frame into a living museum, tracing the density, asymmetry, and melancholic texture of 18th century British painting. The characteristic and glacial backward zooms are not aesthetic whims. They act as the eye of a god observing an insignificant social climber, revealing how the immense and rigid landscape slowly devours him. It is a technical and narrative marvel that half a century later continues to humiliate the entire industry, keeping the untouchable throne of the best cinematography ever shot. This brings us to the visual ceiling of cinema. This is my list, but now it is your turn. What unforgettable masterpiece have I left out? Defend your favorite in the comments. If you love the seventh art as much as I do, hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.